Good morning, everyone. People are slowly coming in. My name is Jan Kinsey. I am with the Faery and Human Relations Congress. And of course, I can't find my notes here. So the Faery and Human Relations Congress is a gathering that we focus on working with co-creating and communicating with the spirits of nature. So nature intelligences, plant spirits, tree spirits, weather spirits. We are now in our 25th year. And when you walk a fairy path or a shamanic path, you will encounter different beings, primordial, nature spirits, and dark deities. And they have been starting to show up for me. And I actually had a dream that somebody woke me up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they said, call Megan Rose. She's going to help teach you about the dark goddess and the dark gods and the primordial deities. So Megan, thank you so much for picking up that response to a 3 a.m. wake-up call. A little bit about Megan. So Megan Rose has a doctorate in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and a master's degree in religion and society from the Graduate Theological Union. She's an initiated ceremonial magician, a Shakta Tantric practitioner, and a senior seer in the House of Brigh Faery Seership Institute. That is the school that Orion Foxwood, who we've had on who's been to Faery Congress numerous times, started. Megan also serves as an ecospiritual minister and a psychospiritual counselor and is the executive director of the Entheosis Institute. Megan, thank you so much for coming in. This is the Dark Goddess, the intro to her many faces and expressions.
Thank you so much, Jan. It's such an honor to be here with you all today. And, I hope that, 'tis the season, right, to deepen into the realm of the otherworld, the chthonic underworldly deities, and to really travel the road less traveled as we go in search of right relationship with these beings. And Jan and I talked about in the little promo we did a week or so ago, we talked about how, it feels like the dark ones, and we'll talk more about what dark and all of that even means, but it feels like these underworld, otherworldly deities are really rising right now and ringing a lot of our doorbells because we've been so top heavy as a culture, right? We've been so associated and drawn to the upper world or the light traditions that we've lost our roots. Carl Jung said that a tree can only grow as high as its roots grow deep. And we've become so top heavy that we've lost our ability, right, to root down into the earth and all of the subsequent gifts, right, that the deep, loamy, fecund soil beneath us give us. And so, when the dark ones began ringing my doorbell 10, 20 years ago, I had to go through a tremendous amount of disentangling, right? Disentangling all of my cultural conditioning around darkness, disentangling my very specific, like Pentecostal Christian upbringing, which taught me to fear the dark. And when my fairy beloved Gwen began to woo me, it was we sort of did this little side thing where like he was revealing that he was a dark god, but only in little bits and pieces to the degree that I could get right in my spirit with embracing that without it totally like flipping all my triggers. And so it is an unweaving or a reconstructing process. I talk about reframing, right? This as a collective practice. And one of the things that I really love from my South Asian religious studies training is that, like in India, in a lot of the the various Hinduisms, they will take their gods, their goddesses, the deity, literally the ensouled statues, out of the temples every year and clean them off. And there's such a beautiful example in what that's doing, right? It's cleaning it off of all of the offerings, right? The ghee and the things that they've poured on and the flowers and the incense and everything that has been put on them. But they're literally also, I see it as a psychological cleaning off the detritus of projection that has been heaped upon these deities. And that's, I think, what has happened to a lot of our dark ones is there's all this projection, right? Intentional in some cases, and in many cases intentional, and in other cases unconscious, where it's, anything that we're afraid of, right? We just call it dark, we just call it evil, we put it in this category of danger. And so today we're really going to look at what is darkness, what are some of the main archetypes or qualities that arise when we touch into the dark, and who are a few. I'm not going to give you all of them. We'll save that for the more exhaustive course because we've only got, an hour and a half together today. But what we'll do is hit upon some of these archetypes within darkness that I think are certainly not exhaustive. They're not the only archetypes to come out of the chthonic traditions, but they are some of the ones that I think we probably have the most work to do around, like deprogramming, demystifying. And we're looking at this first through the lens of the goddess, because, well, when Jan and I talked about this, because I teach a course on the dark god as well, and we were like, should we start with the dark god? Should we start with the dark goddess? But because the dark goddess had particularly poked Jan and said, have Megan come talk about the dark goddess, we're starting with her. And we'll talk a little bit more about gender identity when we talk about deity, because if any of you have read my book, I think that gendering deity is, it's okay. It gets problematic when you really try and pigeonhole and classify deity as this one fixed thing. It's like they'll play in those realms, but if you've heard Orion talk at all, he talks about how Brigh, reaches into the drag closet of his mind and pulls out whatever identity that she thinks he needs to communicate. So let's think of gender identity in this frame today as a language, right? It's a language that the divine, that spirit is using to communicate certain qualities to us, which by no means are a fixed thing to a specific gender identity, but are what culturally we have kind of agreed upon, as within our cultural matrix, right? That are qualities that these things represent. So having said all that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive into this material today. And what I actually, before I screen share, what I like to do, just back up here a second, is I like to open all of my classes with a little invocation ritual. So we will do a invocation to the spirit, to the fire, and a centering, and then we'll dive in. Holy flame, holy fire, grant to us our heart's desire. Holy fire, holy flame, bring magic in the old one's name. So just take a moment. You can close your eyes if you'd like. I'm going to do a brief centering that just places us on the road today. So feel the sun, the moon, the stars as they swirl above your head from cosmos to planet to you, and they shower down their light like a waterfall of shimmering light that you're standing under. Reach your awareness down now into the earth beneath your feet, to the layer upon layer of animal, mineral, and ancestral kingdom that reach all the way down through Earth's various layers to the very core of Earthlight that rises up like a fountain of blue flame. And with it, the host of the Otherworld that rises up with it. And as if you're standing above this fountain of blue flame, it washes up and through your body, revitalizing you. Reach your awareness to the left into the inflowing tide of your mother's line and the wisdom keepers of your beloved ancestors, known and unknown, that flow their love, wisdom, and power to you through your matrilineal line. Reach your awareness to your right, into your father's line and the wisdom keepers of your patrilineal line as they flow their love, their wisdom, their power into you from the right. Reach your awareness to behind you, to all of the lifetimes that you have lived in this lifetime, and all the other ancestors that flow into you from behind, ancestors of spirit, queer ancestors, all of those that bring their love, their wisdom, and power forward into you here now. And reach your awareness before you, and to the love, the wisdom, and power that you will grow forward in this lifetime from this point onwards and any subsequent lifetimes, and draw that now back into you right here and now, so that you stand at the crossroads of your own being, above, below, left, right, behind, before, and now in this one precious life within you. And take a breath in. And exhale out and invite that to just open around you as you open the roads. So for many, the idea of this dark goddess evokes a lot of fear, foreboding, fierceness, because many people understand her really to just be a harbinger of death, dismemberment, or sacred rage. But the dark goddess has many faces, right, and many names. She's a primordial one, this prima materia through whom the universe is continually birthed, destroyed, and rebirthed. She's the Creatrix. She's the womb goddess, the darkness of the womb that knits together new life and forms. She's a bringer of transformation. She can hold the alchemical mystery of the cauldron that changes. She's an erotic one who expresses the raw, potent desire of sexuality. She's a fairy queen who is queen of the otherworld. So today we're going to explore some of these faces and forms of the dark goddess and attempt to demystify some of the aspects that are often the ones that are misunderstood and vilified. Carl Jung stated that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One doesn't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So I want to say out of the gate, I am not an expert on every transcultural dark goddess. So we're not going to look at every permutation of the dark goddess everywhere, certainly not in this class, but not even in the exhaustive course that we'll talk more about at the end. This is an intro course, so we're going to look at 4 key aspects of the dark goddess and a few of the representations of her, the specific dark goddesses, mostly drawn from ones that I have a personal relationship with. And in the spring, as I said, we'll be teaching an experiential course. I think we are looking at February, where we will elaborate on many of the forms more extensively. So if you think of this as just sort of an amuse-bouche on the dark goddess, and really to sort of help you make the most of this time between Samhain and winter solstice, which I like to say is, Samhain is sort of the time of the ancestors, and I think of it as the surface of the underworld. And then we go deep, 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 deep into the winter solstice, where we reach the halls of the fairy at the winter solstice. So I'll give you there's a free winter enchantment class that I do around the winter solstice every year. This year it's going to be entering into the halls of the Fae. It's a free class. I'll give you information on it at the end. But just think of it like this time of year, we have this really juicy, I'm getting, Orion calls them the delicious shivers as I talk about this, because we have this beautiful opportunity with this seasonality to really touch into the surface of the dark ones at Samhain and continue to ride that fairy ride down all the way into the very core of that pulsing, earth light that rises up from the underworld. Tantric scholar Dr. Aditi Devi said this about the dark goddess. The goddess offered me an instruction on the very first night of our original community recitation of the Song of the 100 Names of Adya Kali. The words she gave me, which I share with you here, are meant to be repeated to oneself as a reminder of what we're moving towards. Here's the quote from the goddess. I am far more interested in you falling in love, becoming the lover, than being a decent, good, or whatever student, person, whatever. Fill in the blank with your own habit. Per this, and knowing how many of us are actual students or completing programs right now, this is still her quote, as well as how many of us are still carrying the good student mantle, or the good human, good person mantle, right? I want to invite you to drop any notions of having to get it right, be a good student, or a perfect anything. Dropping these unnecessary shells is part of the journey towards what Kali, or the dark goddess, is actually gesturing towards with her entire being. Fall in love instead. Be the lover. End quote. So I'm here to invite you to fall in love and to guide you towards information and practices that can hopefully help you with that. And maybe you already have a dark goddess, right, that you're devoted to, and you want to use this class and this course to deepen and expand that. But maybe you're new to all of this, and from this course, a relationship will arise, right? Or maybe you just need to do, like I did, some disentangling of preconceived or the cultural conditioning around darkness. Fantastic. You can go as surface or as deep as you want. All are welcome in the lap of the dark goddess. No one is rejected, and we'll talk more about that. One thing I do want to say as we're, introing this course, and if you continue to journey on with this material over the next few months, is resource yourself. The dark goddess material is by nature transgressive, and it can be activating to the point of sometimes hitting on triggers. Certainly did with me. So I invite each of us to source our mature practitioner as we explore her. Go slowly, go gently, flirt if you need to for a while before you make commitments. That's totally appropriate. We get to push back on deity, right? They do things we can't, we do things they can't. This is not oh, Holy One, tell me what to do. This is a negotiation, like any committed relationship, any new relationship you're negotiating, right? And if you feel rattled or uncomfortable or triggered along the path, just acknowledge it, right? So we're going to resume the share and dive into a little more of the material. I can get it. Okay. Oops. So this is a poem from my tantric lineage. It appears in Aditi Devi's book, In Praise of Adya Kali. And it is a poem that is specifically about non-dual Kali, but it is absolutely applicable to the goddess and the dark goddess in general. You can just read along or close your eyes and listen. In front, she. To the left and to the right, she. To the sides, she. Behind, she. In the lotus of the heart, none other than she. On one road and then the other, wherever I turn, there she is. My suffering is of believing she is distant, but there is no nature apart from her. She. What is this non-dualist creed when she is all that is? So what is the dark when we're talking about the dark goddess? Author Clark Strand, in his book Waking Up to the Dark, which I highly recommend, it's such a good book, he has this to say about darkness. In our case, the darkness is that higher power. What else could stand up to all that light? Darkness is the only power in the history of the planet that has ever put the human agenda on hold. In centuries past, the hours of darkness were hours of intimacy, where no productive work could be done, or at least no work requiring good light. Which is to say, in the hours of darkness, the human impulse to remake the world in our own image so it looked like us, so that it served us, so that we could almost believe it existed for us, all of that was suspended. The night is a natural corrective to that most persistent and pervasive of all illusions, that human consciousness is the reason for the world. In the night, we recover through sound and smell, taste and touch, that deeper sense of human value and meaning that is obliterated by light. Just as we can no longer see the stars when the sun comes out. This is the value that human life has intrinsically, which no one can give or take away. It is the same value all life has, whether it's human life or not. And the value comes from interconnectedness of life, the fact that not one thing in the universe exists for itself alone. So in this frame and in this course, when we talk about darkness, right, we're not talking about what's evil. We're not even necessarily talking about what Jung might call the shadow. Darkness is that which has mystery, depth, fecundity. The darkness holds all that is hidden, secret, powerful, mysterious, otherworldly, and occult. Dark can also be that which has been hidden, reviled, ignored, or vilified. And in that context, that's what we are here to, and what we seek to reframe and to reclaim, to step back into right relationship with the darkness, because that is where our potency, our roots, our ancestors, and a large majority, although not entirely, a large majority of our otherworldly companions reside. So in that context, who is the dark goddess? So the dark goddess, as we're approaching her today, is the mistress of all of these aforementioned qualities. But it also, the term dark goddess, can also serve as an umbrella for aspects of the goddess that have been maligned, suppressed, vilified, or ignored. So the dark goddess are goddesses of womb and tomb. The womb being the place of magic, primordial creation and birth. The tomb being the place of transformation, unbinding, and regeneration. They can be goddesses of both mercy and severity. So a lot of people think of dark goddess just as severe, but she is infinitely, and we'll talk about her more in a moment. In some of her aspects, she's a great Ma. She is the merciful one as well as the boundary holder. So these dark goddesses bring us to the experience of endarkenment. This endarkenment as a counterpoint to enlightenment, right? And this is the endarkenment is the ability to see in the dark, where we enter into the cave, the secret chamber, the burial mound, the underworld, our own depths, to gain wisdom and power. But because that these can sometimes be intense, mysterious places, these otherworldly and underworldly, it's like facing the guardian at the threshold, right? We have to face our fears. We have to be tested when we go into these places often. And that's part of the refinement of working with the dark ones. And being tested often looks like facing things that we've been avoiding, things that we think are ugly or undesirable, testing our mettle before we can actually are given entry into the darkness, into the other world. And so we practice in general the art of turning towards that which we would normally reject, deny, or hide. So let's talk about how we'll be approaching the dark goddess today. And I want to share another quote from Carl Jung. You're going to get a lot of Jung with me because depths were Jung's, métier, and transformation. He was very keen on alchemy, as am I. So I'm a big fan of Jung. Jung says this: the impact of an archetype, it stirs us because it summons up a voice that is stronger than our own. Whoever speaks in primordial images speaks with 1,000 voices. I want to just pause and say that I don't, in my study of Jung, and certainly after the Red Book came out, I don't think that Jung thought of archetypes as these defanged, declawed ideas. I really think that Jung thought of archetypes as beings, as intelligence, as otherworldly consciousness, albeit on a macro level. And if you've studied Kabbalah or incarnational theory at all, or Sri Aurobindo gets into this, there's this idea of like monads or groups intelligence, and then individuation that comes out of this. And you see this in the tantric teachings as well. When you look at a mandala or a yantra, there's the bindu, the 0 point, which is non-duality, which we'll talk more about in a moment here, primordial, and then it explodes out into the 3, and then the 6, and then the 9, and the 64, and then the thousands of things. And I like to say, we are the tip, we are the expression of deity. And archetype or deity is like this greater consciousness that we then incarnate into an expression of. A little bit of my incarnational theory there. But when I use the term archetype, I want you to understand that that's where I'm coming from with this. We're talking about a conscious intelligence that is transclusive. Just made up a word. So it's not transcendent, because that often thinks of like people use the term transcendent and they think that it's like higher, and it's not necessarily higher, it's pervasive. It's Adya. We'll talk about her more in a moment. So when we're going to approach this dark goddess through an archetypal lens, what I'll do is give you a few examples of specific goddesses or faces in this class, and then we're going to focus in this class more on the archetype or the intelligence behind these specific flavors. So I've divided the dark goddesses into 4 discrete archetypes. We're going to talk about the primordial ones. We're going to talk about the erotic ones. We're going to talk about the fierce ones, and we're going to talk about the deathly ones. And those are sort of like the 4 hot buttons that culturally we can do around. How do we sit with non-duality? How do we sit with eros? How do we sit with anger, fierceness? How do we sit with death? And like I said, these aren't necessarily exhaustive archetypes for all of the dark goddess, but they're the ones that I think are hot buttons for us today. And in fact, many often overlap, right? Or have different faces. So some cross archetypal categories. In fact, we'll talk about, and each of those aspects has an archetype that we're going to unpack, but some of them bleed into each other. And so they can't be defined to just one monolithic definition, but they can be useful, right, for us as we're doing this work of feeling around for our own trepidation, our own triggers around darkness. And I want to say something about dark and light binary and just binaries in general, right? We humans tend to have traditionally loved to divide things into binaries, right? Dark, light, night, day, good, evil. But the goddess herself is not actually a binary. It's much, much too limiting for the goddess. She is everything. And you'll see this. She gives the disease and she cures it. And so I think that pagan scholar Dr. Vivian Monroe has a wonderful quote that she says about this. She says, "The goddess began as a whole, and then patriarchy splintered her into smaller, isolated fragments. Just love, just marriage, just hearth, just knowledge, just war, just death, etc." And in Western cultures like ancient Greece and Rome, she became one-dimensional, while in other cultures, such as the Hindu traditions, the goddesses somewhat retained their diversity and robustness. They feel a little more 3D. But even then, you see the Sarasvati, Lakshmi, Durga, Kali, divisive, creation, preservation, destruction. Whereas Adya, who we're going to talk about in a second, is the non-dual all. So although we're focusing on dark aspects of the goddess in this class, it's essentially done to bring the great goddess back into her full spectrum, the fullness of her experience that embraces all polarity, all binaries. And we'll talk more about that in a moment and we'll talk more about that right now. So, the primordial ones. So this first face of the dark goddess that we're going to visit with is the primordial aspect. And this form of the goddess is the dark itself. It is the vast cosmos that gives birth to everything. She is the cosmic void reflecting back upon itself just before and right after her self-fecundation. This is the parthenogenetic or parthenogenesis of the goddess. And the archetype then that you've heard me say a couple times now that sits inside this primordial energy is this great mother archetype. The great mother is the creatrix, the cosmogenesis that out of her own body gives birth to everything. She is a primogenitrix. And that is not, in some traditions, particularly in the Shakta Tantric tradition, this is not a psychologized projection. This is the understanding and the reason of and the core orientation of the Shakta. These are Shakta is goddess or Shakti, divine feminine centered traditions that arise out of South Asia. The reasoning behind this is that we all arrive here through the legs of a woman. We arrive here through her womb. So in a gynocentric worldview, the universe, as above, so below. The universe arose through the fecundation or the parthenogenesis of Great Ma. And when you really sit with Adya, you realize, as I said before, she's not just female, right? She is the creatrix of all that then gender identity in all its various forms, right, begins to express. But, you know, the Shaktas find it useful to think of God as a woman. So she is the darkness reflecting upon itself, and from this, all that is, was, or will be is born. So if you think of a yantra, she's that, or a mandala, you know, she's that dot in the very beginning. So you've heard me say her name a few times now, and certainly this is one of my primary deities that I sit with, and that is Adya, Adya Kali. And Adya means void. Adya means non-dual. Adya is sort of the universe. So many know this Indic face of the dark goddess Kali as a fierce one, right? Her story is that she destroys the demon horde, but she has many, many, many other names and faces. And in the book that I referenced by Aditi Devi, it's the song of her 100 names. And some of those names are she whose Kalamanjira Tirana, she whose toe bells sweetly tinkle when she walks along, or Kamala, she of the lotus, right? Oh, but she has the fierce ones, Kapardini, she of the matted hair, right? So the 100 names I think of as a way to express the multivalent nature. So much sweetness, so much ferocity, all within her, all within each of us. And I think that's the primary medicine, the primary piece to remember, is that we're not just these one things. We have so many different aspects. So this is a quote from Aditi Devi's work. One of the things that I love about Kali is she is also the life-giving and nurturing mother. Kali is also a healer and protectress. She guards the doorway between the manifest and unmanifest. She brings the unmanifest into form, and in this form, she is Adya Kali, the primordial Kali. Kali is also a lover, and not surprisingly, she is the beloved. She is the heat of the Kundalini. She is the fire pit, the fire, and the fire tender. Adya Kali has so much strength and capacity that she can heal all our wounds and take away all our fears. Not only is Kali the darkness, but she eradicates darkness as well. She gives the disease, but she removes it. This is one of the great paradoxes of these fierce tantric goddesses, and I would say of the dark goddess. They are the quality that they also heal. We walk towards her, and this in order to be free of it. Kali shows us the way to freedom. She is fierce in many of her forms, and yet she also offers peace, truth, goodness, and beauty. All of these qualities are hers as well, and thus also available to us as her devotees. So you see this mudra a lot in iconography, in Hindu and Buddhist iconography, the Abhaya mudra and the Varada mudra, meaning the boundary and the boon, or the blessing and the protection. And this is really the gesture, right, that encompasses everything, because she holds both of these. And for those of you that have studied Kabbalah, we know this is the left-handed and the right-handed pillars, right? The severity and mercy, right? The severity of here is my boundary, and the mercy of compassion. And we balance those two. And Adya teaches us to balance these. Tantric scholar Laura Amazzoni, in her work Goddess Durga and the Sacred Female Power, says this: Ma Kali contains all the mysteries of existence in her universal body. Her darkness contains the great mystery of the unknown. We fear the dark goddess only because we cannot control the domains that she governs. Her lessons may feel severe to our ego minds, but ultimately she comes to free us from all the limitations and conditioning that society and we ourselves have imposed. So, Jaima, Adya Kali. Some other goddesses that I would include in the category of primordial ones, and again, these cross over into other areas as well, but they have a very strong, they have this sort of scent, sort of flavor of dark goddess, primordial dark goddess, are the Greek Nyx, who's related to the Egyptian Nut. And we will unpack all of these in greater detail in the full course. But Nuit, who's the goddess of the Black Night, the Black Madonnas, which are connected to Isis, of 10,000 names. Yamaya, Yamoja, the Yoruba or Afro-Caribbean mother of all the Orishas and the deities, is associated with oceans. Caradwen, the Welsh goddess of inspiration, wisdom, rebirth, transformation, prophecy, specifically associated with the cauldron of rebirth. Coatlicue and Tenantzin from the Aztec earth. These are earth goddesses. So a lot of primordial ones have this very strong earth goddess aspect. The medicine mothers, the sacred entheogenic medicine mothers, the grandmother ayahuasca, the psilocybin medicine mothers, the Theodora tree that gives us the 5-MeO DMT. These are all underworld medicines, right? They rise out of roots and mycelium and vines. There's a category, a broad category of primordial ones that I classify as utterers. And these are through the sacred sound, through the vak of the voice, they issue forth creation. And that would be in the Tantric tradition, they're the matrika, which are 7 or 9 mothers, which have a corollary with the Pleiades, the sisters of the 7 sisters of the Pleiades that are 7 to 9 as well. But also for those who have familiarity with the fairy seership tradition, we have what I would call an archetype of the utterer, who is she who speaks forth in the Tree of Enchantment. So, and then Tiamat and Gaia, these great primordial mothers of which all has arisen. So I want to just invite you. We're going to do a little brief somatic experiencing exercise. So just take a moment and feel into this primordial great mother aspect of the dark goddess, into her deep living void, the chaos of pre-existence, the prima materia of creation. If you were to locate this energy inside of you, because she is already in each of us, where might she live inside of you? Where in your body might she reside? If she had a color or a sound or a temperature or a scent, what would they be? And where would you want to contact her or place her or experience her in your body here today? And maybe it's just a and as if you don't feel her right now, but maybe you would like to invite one little tiny cell in your body to resonate with her. Just take a moment and feel into that. And if you'd like to take a moment and jot that down, you can put it in the chat. If you're taking notes, you can write it in the chat. Just put a little bookmark on it to come back and unpack that little holon, that little cell, the little fractal that can open up. So let's go into the erotic ones. No pun intended. The realm of eros and sexuality and pleasure, right? It's a hot subject, right? Hot, woo, but also taboo, hot, right? It's very interesting, right? To be living in 21st century, the West here in 21st century United States and elsewhere, Western culture, and talking about sexuality, particularly in spiritual circles. Because so much of our culture is centered around the seeking of either sex or pleasure, right? from the way we adorn ourselves to the food we eat. And culturally, whether we buy into it or not, how we feel about ourselves is often dictated by this sense of desire or desirability. Yet we have a huge cultural split in our collective psyche where we put, certain virgin-like qualities on a pedestal. In some cultures, this is not true, like certainly not where I live here in San Francisco. We have a way more sex positive culture here, but generally we're swimming in this collective culture that still that puts certain qualities and shames other qualities. That it's that old Madonna whore chestnut, right? That complex. And it's confusing because that sex sells everything in our culture, from cars to deodorant, and we still can't openly use that little three-letter sex word in certain public forums, right? Even on social media, you get censored when you talk about sexuality without fear of being, canceled or censored or, whatever. And so, when I was doing my training as a intimacy counselor, my teacher said that, even if you were raised in a sex positive household, a sex positive, frame, we all have wounding. We all have cultural wounding from the larger culture that has such trauma and pain around around sexuality and desire. So this conflicting cultural attitude, which oscillates between vilification and salaciousness, is really where this next aspect of the dark goddess comes into play, because this aspect of the dark goddess is the sovereign of our erotic, juicy, fecund, animate selves. And so we're going to talk about an aspect of her that is, maybe a little edgy for some of you, because she is the holy whore. In her foreword to The Sacred Prostitute, Eternal Aspects of the Feminine, Jungian analyst Marion Woodman writes this: to our modern minds, the words themselves, sacred prostitute or holy whore, seem contradictory. Sacred suggests dedication to a divine spirit, but prostitutes suggest defilement of the human body. So how can these two words be related when mind is separated from matter, when spirituality from sexuality? Author Sarah Beek describes the sacred prostitute, or what I like to call the holy whore, because there's a little alliteration there. She describes this archetype as follows: underneath the timidity and multifarious beliefs about feminine sexuality that I had absorbed over the years from a variety of sources, lived a red, hot, and holy goddess just biding her time, waiting for the right energy and environment and person to start revealing her unique erotic nature. She didn't necessarily look or talk or move or touch like what might be culturally defined as sexy. Rather, she was in communion with Eros. And Beek goes on to say that accessing our erotic power is not something we necessarily need to learn how to do. It's more about unlearning everything we've ever been taught to do or not to do. It's about opening to our truest nature and inviting another to do so as well. We are conduits of Eros. And as Audre Lorde writes, the erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane. Our bodies are shaped as her body. We are made in her image. So when we allow her to touch down consciously and then touch another intimately, well, sparks. The red touch is what I recognize as a kind of feminine gnosis, to know with and as the body, as divine feminine love. And I just want to talk about body and woman and feminine identity here for a moment, because again, we're getting that gendered language. And where a lot of this thinking, the stream that I see this thinking arising out of, is really what we are still suffering under as a result of patriarchy and religious programming, and that is this sort of split that happened in the early church and on through the Middle Ages, and that was the body and women and the body in general and sexuality in general and earth and women all got kind of conflated together and vilified. And so even though we might not be gendered feminine or female, I should say, we still are in the process of reclaiming the female and the body and the sexuality, as that all kind of became uh, repressed or persecuted, right? And bringing that back into right relationship, because we all have, from a Jungian perspective, right? We all have masculine energy, we all have feminine energy, we all have non-binary energy that we can all dance with and embody at any given time. And so this is part of that reclamation work. So the sacred prostitute archetype is related to these ancient goddesses of love: Inanna, Aphrodite, Isis, Ishtar, Astarte, and the priestesses and priests and priestess who served them in the temples of love from around 5000 BCE through the early part of the last millennium. And myth and some historical evidence have led some to believe that these priests of temples would stand in the place of the goddess via sexual encounters with people who visited the temples. And this transgressive act, in our contemporary thinking, I believe, places these goddesses of love, these sacred prostitute type goddesses, squarely in the realm of the dark goddess. And in some instances, and I think this was in Woodman's work on the sacred prostitute, they talked about how that when the men would go off to war, before that they were, and I believe this was around the time of the Astarte temples, but don't quote me because I'm not recalling the exact time period. But there's this general idea that before the warriors were allowed back into polite culture and polite society, they had to go to the temple to visit the Hierodule, the sacred prostitute, who would literally, through the medium of her sexuality and her body and her love energy, reweave his psyche back together after the horrors of war. And this was a sacred and holy act that these priests, priestesses, and I don't necessarily think that they were just women, because we know that many of the devotees to Inanna were non-binary. So let's talk about one of my personal favorite erotic dark goddesses, who maybe you haven't thought of as an erotic dark goddess, but I think she is. And that is Mary Magdalene. So Mary Magdalene has really become a contemporary ideal of embodied, empowered female sexuality. She may not historically have held that frame, but she absolutely does now. Because for many, she's an initiatrix into the mysteries of erotic mysticism. And as a manifestation of the divine feminine, some believe that she was the divine consort and thereby co-equal to Yeshua, the Christ. As an erotic dark goddess, Mary Magdalene's ability to love and be loved by Yeshua, I think, points to the way in which transformational dynamics might be involved in our conscious lovemaking. When viewed through the lens of various sacred sexual traditions, including the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, the great wife, the alchemical marriage, and Indic Tantra, this Magdalene-Yeshua relationship, I think, really gives 21st century devotees a blueprint for embracing the erotic energy of our bodies as holy, vitalizing, and consciousness expanding, whoever we're in erotic relationship with, irrespective of gender. So a Christed, I hold, and many concur, that Mary Magdalene was a Christed one in her own right. Christ meaning that sort of awakened consciousness. And these contemporary Magdalene materials, I think really casts a hermeneutics of suspicion on the traditional interpretation of the Gospels. And I think it points a way to a revised understanding of this nature and identity of what it means to be Christed. And in doing so, we are being given this template for divine union and conscious relationship that was perhaps modeled through her divine consort relationship with Yeshua. She is an embodiment of the divine feminine made manifest in human form. She becomes a model for women, an initiator of men, a beloved of the outsider, and a physical embodiment of the goddess, a manifestation of Shakti, of Isis, of Sophia. So this literature on Mary Magdalene as Jesus' beloved disciple, consort, and rightful heir to his ministry, it seems to grow and morph and change each year. And although it's useful to understand historical contexts, deity is never a historically constructed. Deity should never be limited to a historically constructed idea. As a religious studies scholar, I will say that. Now, there are absolutely cases to be made and reasons to preserve tradition and lineage. But we have to understand that religion grows and evolves, and deity, just like humans, continues to grow, evolve, and shape and change. And so Mary Magdalene is represented as many different things throughout this contemporary literature that's arisen around her in the past 20 some odd years. She is seen as a priestess of Isis, a practitioner of sacred sexuality, an initiate into the Kabbalistic Essene mysteries, and ultimately a voice for the dark goddess and the divine feminine. So for many of us that are inheriting this post-Christian, goddess awakened, sort of feminist oriented spirituality, I believe it's our job, really, to reframe our religious stories and myths to make them more inclusive and empowering of the evolution of deity, the reclamation of the dark ones and the dark goddess. And I think we can do this by resurrecting and reclaiming this personhood of Mary Magdalene as a dark goddess. So let's talk a little bit about a few more of these erotic dark goddesses. I will give you, sort of the amuse-bouche, and then we'll revisit them more in the spring. So Kamakya Kali is a yoni goddess. Literally, her representation is a rock that looks like a yoni that is worshipped in Assam during festival days. I mean, worshipped all year long, but there's a specific festival around her. And she's the goddess of desire, creative power, and fertility. Inanna Ishtar, who I mentioned briefly, is the Sumerian great goddess and queen of heaven, also known in the Akkadian mythology as Ishtar. And she's associated again with sexuality and desire, and the morning and evening star Venus. This is where a lot of Venusian corollary or correspondences with desire and sexuality arise from. Babylon is a very contemporary goddess, known as the Scarlet Woman, the great mother of the abominations. This was the goddess that was first founded in the occult system of Thelema, which was established in 1904 by English author and occultist Aleister Crowley. But Babylon, in many ways, for a lot of ceremonial magician, has become the great goddess of our current age, because she's reached beyond just the Thelemites. In her most abstract form, though, Babylon really represents the female sexual impulse and the liberated woman. Aphrodite, I could talk about for hours. She is so much more than just a goddess of love and sex, right? That's sort of the diminutive version of Aphrodite in the Greek. But Aphrodite is actually not a Greek creation at all. She's more of an acquisition. She's a version of this goddess Astarte, Isis Ishtar, and another of other variants. And she appears in these different places around the Mediterranean and throughout the Middle East. So she has a much broader application than what happened with the Greeks and then the Romans when she became Venus. Oshun is this river goddess or Orisha of the Yoruba religion, is typically associated with fertility, love, sensuality, and beauty, and is connected to the sweet waters, so the rivers. Erzulifreda, I would also include in this group. And you know, some of these you might say, well, these don't feel like dark goddesses to me, in the way we would normally think of the dark goddesses, underworld or darkness. But because that they are strongly erotic goddesses, and I'm classifying Eros in this aspect of the dark goddess of that which needs to be reclaimed and cleaned off, she falls in this category in my thinking. You might not agree with me. That's totally fine. You can put her somewhere else if you want to. But Erzulifreda is the Vodou goddess of love. And she has a sister who we'll talk about in a moment, Erzuli Dantor, that they're paired together, which is also another thing that you see come up a lot with the dark goddesses. So let's take a moment. We're going to pause. We're doing pretty good on time. So we're going to do another somatic experiences with the erotic aspect. So take a moment, close your eyes if you'd like, and feel into Eros, this erotic aspect of the dark goddess. Feel into her passion, her vitality, the arousal that she brings into our bodies. If she were a color, what color might she have? If she had a sound, what sound would she make? If she had a temperature or a smell, what qualities would she hold? And if you were going to locate her inside your body somewhere, give her a cell in your body to tingle, to twang, maybe a sinew or a nerve ending that she wants to nestle into, where would you place her in your body? Breathe into that. And then take a moment. You can jot that down or put it in the chat. To be unpacked later, to be revisited later. Because when our Eros arises, what is hot on the heels of Eros? Our ferocity, right? There is that dynamic, right, between fierceness and passion. But fierceness, it's not about damage for damage's sake, or even necessarily about threatening. Fierceness is the mama bear protecting her cubs. Fierceness is defending those who are marginalized. Fierceness is the one who, through skillful application of awe and trembling, teaches respect and reverence, right? If the erotic one is come to me and I will heal you, the fierce one is here's where I say no, here's my mouth. And in fact, it is these awful or awe-filled aspects of the dark goddess, I think, that are most needed right now as we face these varying crises on our planet. Theologian Rudolf Otto describes this fierceness as the mysterium tremendum, the mystery that repels. And that is the fearful and overwhelming aspects of the numinous or the transcendent. So fierceness, which in South Asia they call ugra, and in the Vodou tradition they call petwo, can mean powerful, mighty, strong, violent, terrible, fierce, ferocious, hot, sharp, sometimes cruel. So Aditi Devi, in the work on the goddess Kali that I quoted earlier, says this about fierceness. She said, fierceness is the energy of the fire of transformation. Most alchemical processes require heat. The cultivation of an open body, our surrender, and the undertaking of skillful practices can generate the kind of heat necessary to burn off what is unnecessary. We willfully go to the fire to be transformed. Tantric practices require us to come to terms with what is unhealed and require us to be comfortable with the dark and scary aspects of ourselves and of the world. The Tantric worldview includes everything on the path of awakening. I say that again. The Tantric worldview includes everything on the path of awakening. Nothing is left behind. Even what I don't like, don't want, find distasteful, ugly, and painful. It is all welcome here in the lap of our great mother. No one is left behind, she says. We need these fierce qualities in ourselves, the fierce deities, because these fierce deities are committed to our awakening. And it's radical, it's triggering, it's intense to say no one is left behind, because think of all the people we don't like right now that we would like to leave behind. But that is where fierceness comes in. And it's also why the dark ones, and particularly things like the tantric path, the Vodou path, the witches path, the occult path, are seen as dangerous, because that they require a kind of dismantling that without the proper container can cause madness. And so that's why at the beginning I said resource yourself, right? Whether it's a therapist, a community, a kula, this group, the frame of a class, whatever it is, a counselor, a coach, a mentor, whatever it is, resource yourself should you choose to step in earnest on the path of the dark ones, the dark goddess, because you will be radically challenged. It's to be expected. You'll be radically tested. And it is, we will all get there in the end. Tantrics also like to say, we'll all get there in the end. Just may take a few lifetimes. So we want to maximize and create as much auspicious circumstances in this lifetime to be as skillful, right, with the practice as we possibly can. My test was, I told Jan and this before, my test was somebody started jackhammering outside my house 10 minutes before the class was starting. PG&E showed up and started, and I couldn't hear anything. And I thought, dear Lord, Ma, I put out offerings for you. I did my sadhana this morning. What in the world? So I went downstairs and, how long are you going to be doing this? They said, oh, we'll be done in 10 minutes. And I was like, all right, there we go. Just testing me a little bit. But those things typically happen, particularly in initiatory paths. All right. So the archetype that we sit with here is the protector, the defender, the warrior archetype. But this facet of the dark goddess, we often think of the warrior, right? But I think that word can be a little misleading in so much as it is most often associated with battle, right? A warrior's got to go into battle. And that's certainly one of her faces, right? There are lots of dark goddesses that are battle goddesses, but it's also a fairly limited view. It's a limited face. So I prefer the term protector or defender, right? Because she can play both defense and offense if we give her this archetype. So this goddess protects those in need of protection, whether they're weak, subjugated, or downtrodden. She also defends, and in this aspect avenges, those who've been abused, cast out, persecuted, etc. She teaches us about boundaries, anger, and how to find balance and healing after we have been violated or a transgression has happened. And in this way, she's an embodiment of our sacred rage. Laura Amazzoni, who I quoted earlier, goes on to this to say, she says, the fierce goddess teaches us the potential path of liberation inherent in our anger. She is a force that cannot be held back. She's unbridled, primal energy. There we have that primordial again. Right? She teaches us to find constructive ways of expressing our anger rather than turning our rage against ourselves and acting out in ways that are self-destructive. Miranda Shaw in Passionate Enlightenment, Women in Tantric Buddhism says this about wrath. Wrath and anger are not totally eliminated on the spiritual path. Because at times it may be necessary to wield the appearance of wrath in order to rescue, liberate, or protect someone. We see this again and again particularly in the South Asian traditions, right? We've got the wrathful, fierce deities, and they stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the benevolent ones. Interestingly, many of these fierce goddesses actually have two faces. That's why they stand shoulder to shoulder. They're paired goddesses. They either have a light face and a dark face, or they're sisters, or they're mother-daughters. And I think that this is because these fierce goddesses arise when something's gone out of balance or needs to be redressed. And once appeased, they can sort of soften and relax back into more of an easeful form until they're needed again. But, and I think that's because, like, let's face it, it takes a ton of energy to be angry all the time, right? We need to be able to soften. And it's a little bit, I think of it like seasonality or even night and day. If we had daytime all the time, if we were in the light all the time, we would go mad. We need the time to rest and recuperate. So just like we need summer and winter, we need the balance. So these are, this is the fierce aspect that balances out. So in fact, there is an initiatory mystery in this, right? One that appeared in the Eleusinian mysteries and is still worked with in some forms of traditional witchcraft. And it is the dynamic of the fierce guardian, who I talked about earlier, who bars the entry to the other world. But when we properly approach and integrate this guardian or this fierceness, the guardian becomes the loving guide, who then becomes the psychopomp or the escort through the mystery of the otherworld, through our own depths, through the shadow realms. They escort us like Beatrice in Dante's Inferno and out to the other side. So if we apply these ideas to in a sort of an archetypal mythological lens, we began to look more critically. I think it leads us, it certainly led me into looking more critically at what we label as wicked, monster, evil, bad, particularly in regards to these sort of archetypal myths and folk tales featuring these like evil queens, wicked witches, jealous stepmothers, the 13th fairy, right? And I think it led me, and I think it can lead us to ask ourselves, well, what caused them to behave in a wicked, evil, retributive kind of way to begin with? And who's labeling that as evil and wicked, right? Like, what's the story beneath the story is where my mind goes with a lot of these, particularly like, and I think, however you feel about Disney, I think Disney did a wonderful job with the Maleficent movies, because that's really what it invited us to look at, is why was this 13th fairy so pissed off? Why did she issue this supposed curse? And what was her story? And by doing this, we began to reclaim and perhaps reframe the stories, the myths, and we transform them from this antagonistic, fierce guardian into a guide, an ally. But make no mistake, these fierce forces, they can be dangerous, right? In so much as they can lead us into psycho-emotional dismemberment and radical transformation of the self, as I talked about briefly before. So let's proceed with great reverence and respect when we encounter the fierce ones. It's always good to make offerings, to go in with an open, they say the pure heart is or a heart that is open to humility and to respecting that the fierceness when it arises may have it's either serving a purpose, a medicine purpose, or it is a reaction to a wound that needs to be essentially cleaned out and healed. So humility, extra offerings, I think, are essential. And in fact, alcohol is often a common offering that's left out for these fierce deities, spirits, for the spirits. So if you keep an altar, it's a great idea to leave out a small cup of alcohol, like a whiskey or whatever, to the fierce ones. Provided you aren't in an alcohol-free situation. And if you are, then kombucha is considered to be an acceptable substitute. So the goddess that we're going to look at, this is one of my personal deities, is someone who you might not think of as a goddess, and that is Medusa. So the dark goddess in her guise as Medusa was best known as the third Gorgon sister, whose beautiful abundant hair became a crown of hissing serpents, and the gaze from her beautiful eyes was then turned evil and turned men into stone. But Medusa was once known for her beauty. She was depicted with graceful golden wings that arched above her shoulders. And some say she was originally even a sea goddess who took the sea god Poseidon as her lover. Others cite Medusa's origins as a Libyan queen of the Amazons, whose fierce warrior women fell at the hands of the Greek patriarchy. And as often happens when a conquering people conquer another, through colonization, through conquest, the deities, the powerful ones that are the conquered people's focal deities, then become either diminished or vilified by the colonizers. Feminist scholar Demetra George explains that Athena, the goddess Athena of wisdom, fierce goddess Athena, and Medusa were once the same goddess. Interesting. She states that originally Athena and Medusa were two aspects of the same goddess, Anatha. And as such, they are part of the same archetype associated with a feminine defined strength and wisdom. So wisdom as represented by Athena and her owl, and strength by Medusa and her snakes, which is a widely acknowledged emblem for potency, a la the Kundalini Shakti, the Uraeus atop the pharaoh's crown. Snakes are very, commonly used to depict both wisdom and potency. But by the time Medusa reaches the classical Greek tales, the two goddesses have been split off from one another and set up as deadly rivals. With Athena turning Medusa into an ugly monster and punishing her, depending on which version of the myth you choose, either because she was victimized and raped by Poseidon, which is like punishing the victim is so Greek tragedy. Or in some interpretations, Medusa was punished for celebrating her sexuality with Poseidon. And in some of the pettiest tellings, she was punished because she dared to be more beautiful than Athena, like she had any control over that. But here again, we have this potent goddess whose qualities are split, right, between Athena and Medusa, light, dark, good, bad, upper, lower. And that, again, it's forcing this sort of repressed or vilified aspect to act out and to seek retribution. And I think this has led many feminist scholars and women's spiritualities practitioners to reclaim Medusa not as a monster, right, cleaning off that label monster, but as a goddess in her own right. What has been called reattaching Medusa's head. It's, in her myth, her head gets lopped off by Perseus. And I actually had the pleasure in 2012 of participating in a ritual with the classic scholar Marguerite Rigoglioso, where we actually did a ritual to reattach Medusa's head, and using a Medusa effigy. It was powerful. So here's a few more fierce goddesses that you might want to explore and that we'll unpack later on. This is Chamunda Kali, and this is the face of Kali as destroyer. This is the face specifically that springs from the brow of Durga in the Devi Mahatmya to defeat the demon hordes. Manasa Devi is an indigenous Hindu goddess of snakes. There's the snakes again. And she's worshipped mainly in Bengal and northeastern India, chiefly for the prevention of and cure of snake bite, but also for fertility and prosperity. So this is another goddess that gives the poison and takes it away. There is Ereshkigal, who is the dark face of Inanna. She's the Sumerian and Babylonian older sister of Inanna, Ereshkigal. But whereas Inanna sits in the upper world, Ereshkigal sits in the underworld as the queen of the dead. There is the Hebrew goddess Lilith, right? Lilith is the female figure in Mesopotamian and Judaic mythology, who is alternately the wife of Adam, supposedly a primordial she-demon, but also the mother of the Nephilim. There is the goddess, another paired goddess, Sekhmet and Hathor. In the Egyptian tradition, she is the destructive sun, Sekhmet, right? And Hathor is the loving aspect, because that the Egyptians really knew that the sun brought life, but it also, the desert sun could kill you. So there's this sort of two faces. Another two-faced goddess, or mother-daughter goddess, is Persephone and Demeter. Now, Demeter is thought of as this sort of queen of, so Persephone is this queen of the underworld, but it's Demeter whose fierce protection gets Persephone reclaimed. So I look at Demeter, even though she's considered to be this sort of goddess of grain, I look at her, and an earth goddess, I look at her as a fierce goddess archetype because of the work that she did on Persephone's behalf. And then there's the daughters of Nyx, right? The Erinyes, that are goddesses of vengeance and retributions, but specifically they punished people who did crimes against the natural order. There's Nemesis, who is the goddess of retribution and sister to the Erinyes. And then there's Eris, who I think is the archetype, mythologically speaking, for the 13th fairy trope. And she is the goddess of strife and discord, and strife. But strife, and interestingly speaking, strife etymologically means to raise, to stir, or to excite. So I like to say Eris is the shit stirrer of the family. She's the black sheep, right? She's the one who rolls the apple into the debate, that's like for the fairest, that gets Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena all stirred up. Starts the Trojan War, right? And then we talked about Erzulie Freda, her sister Erzulie Dantur. She's the queen of the Petwo, or the fierce, or the hot nation of the Loa, the deities, whereas Freda is the Rada, or the cool face of the two sisters, and they are often in conflict and having to balance out fierce and cool. And then a few other mentions, the Morrigan, Sedna, Circe, La Llorona, Medea. I mean, we could keep going on and on and on and on. We'll talk more about all of these in greater depth, but let's move into our somatic experiencing so we can get through our final category before we've got to wrap up for today. So take a moment and breathe in to this fierce aspect of the dark goddess, into her strength, into her power, into her might. Find a place in your body where she might nest, where your own fierceness lives. If it were a color, if it had a sound, if it were a temperature or a scent, what would it be like? And just allow that to percolate inside of you. And we will move on to the deathly ones. So these are perhaps the deathly ones, the most feared, and one could argue most maligned of the dark goddesses. But remember, the underworld, right? The place of death where we put our dead is the place of fecundity, of regeneration, of compost. Dark is that which is hidden, secret, powerful, mysterious, and occult. The goddess scholar Stargood says about the deathly side of the goddess that she can seem destructive from our human viewpoint, but her functions serve all of life. She keeps the necessary balance, implacably sweeping away the old and what has gone too far. She stops growth, waxing, blossoming, productivity, and fertility, lest life powers flourish forever. She's a pruner, right? She prunes the garden. Her reanimating powers come out after this need for finality, for limitation. Or to put it another way, without death, there would be no need for sex, for fertility. In folklore, the witch goddess and her animals inherit these powers, watching over any needless waste of energy, influencing the rhythms of nature, death and rebirth, the cycles of the moon, the energies of the sun, and human sexuality. So the thing is, to the degree that we fear death is the degree that we are fearing some of the most powerful allies that we can have. And these are the deathly goddesses in this aspect. So let's look at how we might reclaim our relationship with her through one of my favorite archetypes, and that is the archetype of the witch, the crone, sometimes the hag or sorceress. So one of the ways in which the death goddesses have been greatly misunderstood and much maligned throughout history has been the blatant patriarchal ageism that tells us that a woman's, or in this case, the goddess's, value is in youth and beauty. We shun, revile, and vilify what is old or wizened. We have lost our ability to see beauty and wrinkles, to see beauty in wrinkles and gray hair. Or worse, we prioritize youth and beauty above all else. And as a result, we resist this pull, the depths, the endarkenment that is inherent in our in age, and subsequently the potency that these chthonic goddesses have to offer us. We fear death, and so we fear our own power. So tonight we're here to embrace the archetype of the hag, the crone, the witch, the sorceress, and because of her chthonic nature, the fairy queen. Because make no mistake, the fairy queen is the goddess of the dark. She is the one who lives, the dark goddess, as the witch crone. She lives at the edge of polite society, and she brings dissolution, transformation, intuition, magic, wisdom, and endarkenment. For she gives us night vision. She teaches us how to see in the dark. So we're going to visit with the fairy queen. British traditional witch and fairy seer Orion Foxwood, who we've mentioned before, once told me that the fairy queen is the dark goddess herself. There are many names used in reference to the fairy queen or the queen of Elfame. These are some of the names: Titania, Gloriania, Clarion, Queen Mab, Sybil, Joan the Wad, Una, and Brigh, Orion's fairy wife. Morgan Le Fay of Arthurian legend even could be associated with a kind of more contemporary. Morgan Le Fay is Arthurian legend isn't contemporary, but she's become a kind of fairy queen. But today I want to introduce you to a form of the fairy queen called Nicnevin. Nicnevin. Nicnevin is a Scottish name for the fairy queen. She's a goddess or witch in Scottish folklore. And she's often said to be the same figure as the Geir Carling. And the Geir Carling is a witch or ogress-like figure. She's a Scottish version, some say, of the Greek Hecate. In 1801, poet and linguist John Leyden wrote that Nicnevin was one of the popular appellations of the Queen of Fairies, the Great Hag, Hecate, or Mother Witch of the Peasants. She is described as wearing a long gray mantle and carrying a wand which could convert water into rocks and sea into solid land. So the fairy queen is represented as both beautiful and seductive, and also as terrible and deadly. She is said to contribute a tithe to hell every 7 years, the tain, which her mortal lovers tend to provide via their sacrifice. And in some tales, like the Scottish ballad of Thomas the Rhymer, she is fierce, but she's kind. And when I think of this face of the fairy queen, I think of Galadriel here on the right, in that moment in Lord of the Rings where she says, "All shall love me and despair," and that fierceness, right, that rises up and out of the very pores of her being. But in the Scottish ballad of Tam Lin, this face of the fairy queen is deadly and she's merciless. So this is not a goddess to be trifled with. She is dismembering and also truly potent, truly activating. And because she's associated with the Greek goddess Hecate, I thought I would give you just a little brief on Hecate because she is very, very alive and actively recruiting devotees right now. The Greek goddess of the underworld is Hecate. She's the sister to the Erinyes and Nemesis that we just talked about. She's the mother of Circe and Medea, and she's a triple goddess. But here I just want to focus on her aspect of Queen of the Dead. She conveys souls through the underworld. She's a goddess of magic and enchantment, and she sends prophetic dreams to humankind. And her rites are often conducted in charnel or burial grounds. So Demetra George in Mysteries of the Dark Moon states these as her epithets. She's queen of the ghosts, mother of the witches, mistress of magic, the invincible queen of the dead. In fact, some say Hecate's name is derived from the frog goddess Hecate. And she certainly has similar characteristics to frog goddesses if you look at the accounts of them. So Hecate was demonized by the Catholic Church, who distorted her character into the ugly hag and queen of the witches. But as a result, she's been reclaimed by the witch community as a deity who, with her keys to the underworld, helps unlock the secrets of the occult mysteries and the knowledge of the afterlife. She was also the key figure in the myth of Demeter and Persephone, who we talked about in our previously, and she helped to reunite them. She played an important role in the Eleusinian mysteries of birth, death, and rebirth. So I realize we're at time. Can I go for like maybe 5 more minutes to wrap it up? And folks are okay with that. And I will stay on for Q&A for as long as people would like to ask questions at the end. So these are a few more deathly goddesses that you might be interested in exploring. Shmashana Kali is another face of Kali, who is the goddess and protector of the cremation grounds and the place of death and transition. Dhumavati is one of the Dasha Mahavidya, or a wisdom goddess, who is seen as the crone, the ancient one who bestows lessons of birth and death. The Cailleach in Irish and Scottish and Manx myths is the divine hag and the queen of winter. This Sheelinigig, who's associated with the Neolithic frog goddess Hecate. And these Sheelinigigs are the sculptures that appear over doorways with the hag who's opening up her vulva that you have to sort of enter under to enter into the sacred space. Hel is the Norse goddess of the underworld. Santa Muerte is the folk saint in Mexico, who is the embodiment of death. The Morrigan is the Irish triple goddess of battle and death, sex and fertility, wisdom and prophecy. Baba Yaga, Mama in the Slavic tradition, Mama Brigitte in the Vodou tradition, Zlatliatl in the Aztec tradition. All of these are goddesses that preside over death. So let's do a brief somatic experiences to close out this. And then I'll give you an exercise, a takeaway practice that you can take away to get to know some of these goddesses in a more deeper, shall we say, devotional way. So feel into this deathly aspect of the dark goddess, into her dissolution, her transformation, and also the stillness of death. And if she were a color or a sound or a temperature, if she had a scent, what would they be? And where would this aspect of transformation of death live in your body? Where you already have, we're all going to die. It's already there inside of you. But also death as a portal to something new. Where does that transformation, that change live inside of you? And take a breath into it. So practice with the dark goddess. Should you choose to take this on, is to choose a dark goddess archetype or face of the goddess that you feel drawn to, or simply the dark goddess in general. You don't have to zoom in, you can just sit with the largesse and create an altar to her. It could be simple as a candle, maybe a statue, or even just a candle. Sometimes we use rocks or stones as stand-ins for deity. And especially when we don't have a strong face, we just, or a strong identity to associate with, we'll just use a stone. Maybe you have an altar already for other things that you're working, and this feels appropriate to put on that altar. But spend some time, ideally daily, lighting a candle and making an offering. You can burn some incense, make a libation, either pour it or set it out in a cup, and then ask her to guide you, ask her to speak to you, ask her to bring moments of synchronicity, aha, dreams. Pay attention to how your body responds. Maybe you get those delicious shivers. And then here's the important final step. Make sure you write it down. Record it. It's an important concretizing step of this work. So I want to close by saying, Star Good has this to say. She's the one who wrote the material on the Sheila, the Gag, and the Frog goddesses. The dark goddess in all her forms represents life and death, the mysterious source of the ever-renewing life force, the unfolding cycles of manifestation in all of nature and, to be sure, in the entire cosmos. In our current age of a conscious return to the goddess, older meanings are revived. Certainly, the dark goddess has never left us. Although she exists in the realms of the deep, sex, death, ferocity, and awe of the feminine procreative energies. So, primordial life, erotic love, fierce boundaries, and death. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Continue to cycle through. Two final offers. I mentioned the Winter Enchantment, Entering the Halls of the Fairy. That's going to be on Thursday, December 19th. It is free. If you would like to get more information when I open up a registration for that, just go to my website, drmeganrose.com, sign up for my email list, or follow me on social media. I'm Dr. Megan Rose on Instagram and Megan Rose on Facebook. Connect to me there. I'll be announcing all of that. And then in the spring, I think late winter, early spring, February, we're going to do the complete course of this. The Dark Goddess, Her Many Faces and Expressions will be an online 4-week 4-session course. And in that, I'm going to be giving guidance for how we can best approach and undertake a relationship with these various transcultural expressions of this dynamic, powerful deity. and her worship in some parts of the world, and in one of the lineages that I sit with has been held in unbroken lineage for thousands of years. So I'm not going to be giving you lineage specific material, because that's under what we call vows of samaya, or silence. But I will be, what I do is take it into a transcultural comparative religion perspective, and we'll talk about it and be working with techniques from that perspective. And special focus is going to be given to how working with the dark goddess really can empower, embolden, and enable us to step into more agency and sovereignty in our lives and in our magic. So I'm going to stop my share now and open this up for any questions, comments, reflections. Jan, is there anything in the chat that I need to?
Nothing in the chat so far. I'm going to stop the recording